Okay, the goal of these notes are for you to walk away being able to describe both what caused industrialization and the consequences of this industrialization. Don't forget to be filling out those fill in the blank notes that are posted to your Google Classroom as we go along. Pause as needed, and then answer those reflection questions at the end. The first key question to answer is what powered our civilizations before the Industrial Revolution? I like to think of this as four stages before we get to the Industrial Revolution, each one having a different source of power. Right, human civilization, in order to create these massive structures that we keep talking about, require a lot of people working together and moving a lot of objects. Even if you're not building structures, trade networks, everything requires some type of energy to move people and resources. And the first way of doing this was simply human muscles, right? People were just moving everything themselves. But this was very limiting and very tiring. You remember this also kind of what leads to the beginning of slave labor, as people don't want to do the hard work themselves, so they enslave others to do that work for them. Then we enter stage two, not just using human muscles, but animal muscles. Now, of course, doesn't mean that we just stopped doing everything with our own human bodies. We continue to use human muscles as well as animal muscles. But we were able to do this because we started to domesticate certain breeds of animals, like horses and cows. So we captured these wild animals and we bred them to make them more useful for us. One key way in which we were able to harness this power was farming, right? Instead of just planting everything ourselves, we were able to hitch ards and plows and other devices to animals we've domesticated, and that allows us to grow a lot more food with a lot less energy being put out by our own muscles. This allows more population. One of the most important crops the human species has ever cultivated are the grains, like wheat, rice, things like that. Here's the problem, though, is that grains are not really easily digestible for our bodies. In order to make them digestible and usable, we have to grow them, harvest them, and then we have to grind them down. And again, you can use human muscle power for this. Some people still use their own bodies to do this, but with animal domestication, it becomes a little easier. As you can see here, the grinding wheel, or the grinding stone that's being used by a human, is now being replaced by a millstone being pulled in a circle by an animal. And so it just uses a rock and animal power to do the exact same thing of grinding down the grain into a flour that can be then used to make breads and other foods. You also see the exact same thing happening with transportation, right? Instead of human power carrying people or objects, you now have animal power doing the same thing. This allows for people to travel longer distances, can make longer trade routes, and you just kind of see how this can be advantageous to human species. The third stage here is what we refer to as wind power or water power, right? So some cultures have been able to harness the power of using the wind and water in order to turn their millstones, and that's why we call this a water mill or a windmill, because what it's doing is it's harnessing the power of the wind to turn these turbines, that then turns these gears, which then turns the rotating millstone in order to grind down the grain into a flour. The water is using the same thing here, right? The river is running through this, turning this wheel, which turns this wheel, turning this wheel, which then turns the millstones. But again, you see the same thing now using wind and water in order to replace human and animal muscle, allowing for a lot more grain to be processed. Obviously, wind power can also be used in order to be caught in order to push the sails of a ship, which also again allows further, longer distance transportation and hauling of more heavier objects. So that's kind of it for a long time, right? If you want energy to move things, you either have to, do it with human muscle, animal muscle, you have to hope the wind is blowing, or if it's a mill, right, you can build next to a river, but then you have to, right, have very limited spaces in which to build these things. But the scientific revolution that we've been talking about for a while now brings a whole new invention that changes the game: the steam engine, steam power. And the way this works is essentially you create a fire that creates steam, which pushes a piston, rotating a turbine, and this produces mechanical work for you. As long as you've got a fire, that fire is given a steady supply of fuel, it'll keep that engine running. So you've got a boiler right here with water in it. You throw coal in it, you keep that full coal burning. That turns the water into steam, pushing it through the pipes, which then pushes up and down this piston as it cools and releases, which then moves the piston, the turbine, and now you've got rotational energy to move or whatever object or machine you want. The textile or cloth industry is one of the first to become industrialized, and this has some pretty big consequences, right? For a long time, if you want to make cloth, you literally had to use a weave, a loom like this, and it's done by hand by taking these different threads and you weave it in and out to create a single piece of cloth. Eventually, you were able to figure out how to create a machine that would use a pedal power but still essentially powered by human muscle. You take this design and you add it to the steam engine, and now you can produce a lot more cloth, a lot more textile in less time for less money. However, in order to make this cloth now, you're going to need a lot more of the raw material, and the number one raw material that people wanted to make clothing out of was cotton. A lot of cotton is being grown in the southern states in the newly formed United States at this time, but as you know from any other U.S. history class, that cotton was being grown on plantations where the work was being done by enslaved Africans. Now, growing cotton was very difficult, but even more difficult than the growing of the cotton was the picking of it and the de-seeding of it that you needed to do in order to then turn the cotton balls into the threads that could be used in the looms that you then use to create textiles. Originally, you would do this by hand. You'd pick the seeds out, and but then you would have a new invention, the cotton gin, and you were able to then through the cotton gin pick the seeds out much quicker, producing more supply. And then when you add, of course, the steam engine to this, it becomes much faster and profitable. In fact, if it was not for the invention of the cotton gin, essentially slavery would have probably maybe died out in the United States as just unprofitable. But then when you're able to speed up the process of the with the cotton gin, and then you add that to the Industrial Revolution going on and the industrialization of the textile industry, all of a sudden slavery became much more profitable again and gave it kind of this second life in the South. And this, of course, leads to the Civil War in the United States. Of course, the scientific revolution and the march forward of progress means that machines are going to get better over time as people tinker with them and experiment with them, and the steam engine is no different. So this massive steam engine, the early design for it, eventually is going to be miniaturized and be used to turn wheels that move locomotives, trains. In fact, this is so revolutionary that by 1870, just about 100 years after the invention of the steam engine, they're miniaturized to the point and they're being used on steam locomotive engines to move people across large different distances at speeds we never saw before. In North America in particular, once we completed the Transcontinental Railroad, instead of taking 6 months to travel across the United States, it now took 7 days. This means people, resources, and ideas can go farther and faster and more closely interconnect all the people on Earth. This is going to have some really great benefits, but it's also going to have some pretty dire consequences. Real quick definition here. Industrialization is that process of using machines to create things instead of animal and human power, right? And it's the steam engine that really powers a lot of this. The Industrial Revolution is happening at the exact same time as the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the political revolutions, the Napoleonic Wars. So this really is a period where everything in the world and the way human beings live and interact with nature and each other is changing very quickly. So why is England the first place to industrialize before anywhere else? Well, they've got some advantages that other places don't have. Number one, they've got large deposits of coal around their island that can be used to fuel the fire for their steam engines. Number two, they also have a lot of rivers that supply a lot of water that we can use to help create the steam for those engines. They also have a lot of iron deposits near where they're building their factories that they can use as raw material to build the machines in the factories themselves. On top of that, they have a large population, right? So they have a lot of people who are free to work in these factories. Going back to those saleable rivers for a moment here, it means that it's really easy to transport resources from the factories and the inner part of the island to the coast, where they can then start sending those out to other places around the world to sell to bring money in. And then finally, and where those rivers let out into the ocean, you've got a lot of safe harbors. This means they're places for the ships to dock and safely have everything loaded up onto them so that they can then sail across the sea and sell these things to people all over the world and then bring the wealth back to England. So really, England's got a lot going for itself, and that's why it's one of the first places that industrializes. But it doesn't stay the only place that industrializes long, as other European countries and the United States quickly follow this process. That leads us to our final question here, which is how is the study of economics impacted by industrialization? So, to answer this, first you have to know what is economics. And economics really is the study of, well, what do we make? So, for instance, you've got, say, a plot of land. What are you going to use that land for? You can either use it to grow food, to farm, or you could use it for a strip mine to take all the resources out of it, right? You can't do both with that same plot of land. You got to make a choice, and economics is the study of how do you make that choice. Similar question of you got a river, what are you going to do with it? You could turn that into a safe place for people to go swimming and relax, or a place to dump the sewage and pollution from your factories, right? Can't do both. The second thing economics studies is what resources should we use to make the thing we want to make, right? So we've got a lot of resources. We got land, we got labor, and we got capital. So land in economics is defined as essentially anything that's coming from nature, whether that's the physical soil, the rocks, the water, the fish, even the atmosphere, the gas in the sky. All that in economics terms is considered land, a natural resource. Labor is just work done by human beings. You can either have someone be a miner, you could have them be a teacher, work at Culver's, but they can't do all three things at the same time. You got to make choices. Just like you have to make choices about what you're banking and how you use natural resources, you have to make choices about how you're going to use the limited human labor that's available. And then there's capital, which is man-made things that we use to make other things, right? You've got a computer server here. How are you going to use that computing technology, right? You can only do so many things. Computers and servers have a lot of power behind them, but there's still only a finite amount of processing power available. What are you going to use that for? Are you going to use it to solve the mysteries of the universe, or are you going to use it to figure out what the best investments are going to be, right? You got a table. You can use that table to eat your dinner at, or you can use that table as a assembly station to put together parts of a machine that you're going to sell, right? Bolts of clothing, of cloth, of textiles. What are you going to make out of those? Shirts, beds, bedding sheets, tablecloths, napkins. How are you going to use this, right? You can't do everything, so you got to make choices, and economics is about those choices. And then one of the most interesting questions by far, for at least for me, for economics, is who gets the things that are made, right? You're making something. There's not an unlimited amount of the things that you've made. So how do you decide who should get those things? Should it be based on whoever needs it the most? Should it be based on whoever can pay the most for it? How do you divide this up, right? And so that's economics in a nutshell. Now, the first big name in economics that we're going to talk about in this class is Adam Smith, and he's really considered the founding father of the economic system that dominates the world we have today. We call it capitalism. Now, Adam Smith, in his theory of capitalism, says that individuals working to make as much money as they can would create the best outcomes for everyone, right? He says that if everyone decides to make whatever people are willing to buy using the least resources possible and selling to the person willing to pay the highest price for it, that is going to lead to the best outcome for everyone. After all, competition for profit will ensure the best products for the best prices. What he means by this is that if you and I are making the same product, a shoe for instance, right? If I can make that shoe using less resources, I can charge a lower price than you, which means that people are going to buy from me. That forces you to get more efficient with the resources you use, and so you're going to have to make a better product with less resources to charge a lesser price in order to make money. And this way, resources are used the most efficiently, and we get the cheapest products at the best quality possible, right? And in this system, everyone has the right to own their own individual property and make their own decisions on how they want to use that property to make as much money for themselves as possible. Under a pure version of this, there's no rules on how you use your property. Essentially, if you can use your property in a way that makes you money better than any other way, that is your decision to make for yourself. The government doesn't step in and tell you how to use that property, how to use your land, your labor, your capital. You make all those decisions for yourself based on how much profit you can make. Now, the second economic philosopher we're going to talk about here is a man named Karl Marx. Karl Marx is the father of communist economic theory. Communism is not a system of government, it is a way of looking at economics, trying to answer those three questions. What do we make? How do we make it? and who gets it. Now, Karl Marx was looking at, he was kind of a historian, a sociologist, an economist. He did a lot of different things and wrote a lot of different ideas down. He saw that this capitalist system that was developing during the Industrial Revolution was creating a lot of inequality, right? The rich were getting really rich, and the poor were getting really, really poor. And he said this was all caused by this competition and profit-seeking motive created by capitalism. And he asked himself, is there a better way to go about this without exploiting the workers? And so in the communist economic theory, he says that people should make whatever benefits the most people using the most efficient resources possible, and those resources, when produced, whatever products you make, should be given to whoever needs the thing the most, not whoever is going to pay the most for it. So in a capitalist system, you make whatever product you think you can make the most money making, and then you sell it to whoever's willing to pay the most for it. In a communist system, you're not working for money. You're not working for profit. Instead, you're working for the good of the community. All resources are owned collectively by the community, and the community collectively decides how to use those resources, what they should make with it, how much of it they should make, and who should get those things that are made based on need. So communism is best summed up as, everyone working together for the benefits of everyone. Now, there are problems with this system. Every time it has been tried to be implemented, it's led to massive poverty and corruption, mass starvation, huge unemployment lines, and a lot of problems, right? It just doesn't work in its pure form, at least has never worked yet. Of course, the same can be said about pure capitalism. And what you wind up getting in a lot of places is what's called socialism, which is where we collectively decide some things together, like we decide we're going to have a socialized military, right? Not private military. We all collectively decide to make a military, a fire department, things like that. But when it comes to things like medical care, or when it comes to what brand of toothpaste should be made, that's left up to individual profit-seeking motive. And so we kind of wind up with a system that's a lot of Adam Smith and a little bit of Karl Marx, and that's kind of how the world operates today. So why does this all matter? Well, the Industrial Revolution is this huge turning point for mankind. It transforms us from a species of mostly farmers to a species of mostly city dwellers and factory workers. This is a drastic change in how we've lived. For hundreds of thousands of years, we were either hunters and gatherers or farmers, and with some people living in cities. Now, most people live in cities and work in factories or in office buildings, and very few of us live on farms. Secondly, mass production and competition will unleash a host of new technologies on the world, which will increase the standard of living for everyone on the planet, or at least a large chunk of the planet. However, this profit-seeking motive from Adam Smith's capitalism is going to lead to massive inequality, and this will create a push for better wages, child labor laws, cleaner cities, because industrialization, it really does take advantage of a lot of the people that used to be the peasants who are now just low-paid workers, right? Even kids are being taken advantage of. It creates filthy cities. This is a real problem, so there becomes a pushback to this. And soon, industrialization will be used to make new powerful weapons of war that are going to be unleashed in the world wars and will be applied to this new thing, this new concept that we create, genocide, in what we now call the Holocaust. And then finally, these two economic theories of capitalism and communism that get developed because of the Industrial Revolution are going to be the trigger of the Cold War that almost ends in nuclear war, killing all life on Earth multiple times. And so there's a lot here that's going to impact the future. Okay, we've gotten to the end of it. I know these things are kind of long for you, but hopefully you're following along. Fill in those blanks, and then write those 3 reflection question responses, right? What is today's goal? 3 important facts from this lesson that shows you understand that goal, and then 1 question you still have to help you deepen your understanding. All right? Thank you for taking time to do this. Hopefully you watch the notes and you're hearing this, and I'll see you in class to talk about the Industrial Revolution a little bit more with a specific case study of exactly how it impacted the lives of the people, the cities that were the actual workers in the Industrial Revolution.